With me today to come and join me, I've also got a very special guest, Nigel Poulton, who I'm sure many of you know for his Kubernetes and container courses as well. And I suppose it will do us well to just jump straight into it. So, Nigel, it's fair to say Kubernetes is a hot topic. You know, it's a hot matter that's really popular right now. But where are we with Kubernetes today?
Yeah. So, hello, mate. I was at the original Tech Field Day, like too long ago, 11 and a half years ago, I think he said. And yeah. And do you know what? Since then, I've been hooked on the events. I really love what they bring to the community, the interaction and all that kind of stuff. I do want to point out as well, because Stephen said, this is a NetApp couple of hours that we're talking about right now. But I want to say front and center that I'm not NetApp and I'm independent. So let me just tell you how I got involved with this. I know the team at NetApp because they do some great things. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. But we were having a conversation and they said, hey, do you want to come and talk with Kirk on Cloud Field Day coming up? And I was like, well, I love Cloud Field Day. That sounds great. What do you want to talk about? Well, what do you want me to talk about? And they're like, well, Kubernetes. So I'm like, I love Cloud Field Day. I love Kubernetes. I think I'm probably in on this. And then they said, oh, and just keep it real. Like, don't pitch our products or anything. Just enjoy yourself talking about Kubernetes. So I said, rock on, I'm in. Anyway, look, it's so cool to be here. Where are we with Kubernetes? Sometimes I think that people forget, right? We're probably 7 years just about into Kubernetes. So it's not a super new technology. We've been working with it since the summer of 2014. But the elephant in the room always, when I talk about where we are, is it's still too complex, and there's still a long way to go on the journey. But that said, right, and you're going to expect this from me, anybody that knows me, right? But it is super cool, game-changing technology. And because we're 7 years into that journey, and even more years into the journey of containers, quite a lot more of it is stable than I think a lot of us give credit to. So we're 7 years into an exciting, game-changing journey. And that 7 years has allowed core features of Kubernetes to become really mature. I'm talking about things like kind of at that low plumbing layer. That's all laid and the groundwork is good. But there's still quite a ways to go on that journey. You know, we mentioned complexity and everything's a moving target as well, isn't it? So where we are today is not where we want to be eventually. And look, who knows where we want to be eventually, to be honest. It's going to be constantly moving. But that's the great thing about technology these days. And Kubernetes and open source and cloud is one of the best at this, I think, at just iterating at a fast pace, almost the same pace that the rest of the industry is iterating at. In fact, sometimes ahead. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say there, it is certainly maturing or mature, and I think we're seeing it heavily adopted, right? But like you say, there are still elements that remain complex within that, which, you know, I think most vendors look at as a huge opportunity to go and help the project and help users in that space. So, I mean, the complexity that's there today, what are the sort of things that you see really happening to go and reduce this complexity for somebody that wants to get started with Kubernetes or put it at the core of their business?
Right. Look, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the project overall is getting less. I'll be careful what I say here. I don't know if it actually is getting less complex because it's growing all the time. But I think that the processes of getting and installing Kubernetes, and I'm talking about highly available, high performance Kubernetes, is a lot easier than it was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. You know, back then you needed to be pretty much a kernel engineer or a team of kernel engineers just to roll your own highly available, high performance Kubernetes. And we've progressed from there, but there's still work to be done. I do think that one of the things that has really been useful as an on-ramp to Kubernetes has been some of the hosted Kubernetes platforms. So if you look at most of the cloud platforms out there, all of them, to be fair, they offer a hosted Kubernetes service, which is basically your cloud provider saying to you, look, you probably don't want to be a Kubernetes and an infrastructure expert. You probably want to focus on your applications. And if that's you, tell you what, we've got an offering from you here that will let you almost pick off a shelf, couple of clicks, and we will deploy you a production grade Kubernetes cluster. I use air quotes, right? Because look, production grade means different things to different people. But as an on-ramp, what you do is you get like, I'm going to say 5 clicks or something, right? And you get high performance, highly available Kubernetes control plane with all of the updates and things taken care of for you, leaving you just to manage the nodes, which isn't the hard part. I mean, it's not super easy all the time, but that's not the hard part. The hard part's the high availability of the control plane. But you manage the nodes and you manage your applications. And for a lot of people, that model really worked. I think 2019 and 2020 were huge years for hosted Kubernetes. And a lot of people followed that pattern. And interestingly, as they did that, so they would deploy Kubernetes clusters hosted, a few clicks in the cloud, and get their apps on there. And as part of putting their apps on there and managing those apps, and in the background, I don't know, almost accidentally, they learned quite a little bit about Kubernetes to the point where I think we all know that cloud services, while they might look cheap at the start, tend not to be as you ramp up scale, okay? So as companies kind of on-ramped to Kubernetes with hosted, learned a bit in the background, saw their costs go up, suddenly realized, actually, we might be getting to a point now where we can start rolling our own. Only if you want to roll your own in the enterprise, and I've got a long history in the enterprise, that's not something that you just do without a lot of thought and a lot of planning and preparation. So just to answer your question, I think one of the things that we did a lot was hosted Kubernetes. It made it accessible to mere mortals like you and I, Kirk, that aren't Linux kernel engineers. Yeah.
No, and that's great. And I think that's probably evident of a lot of people in the industry. I see more and more people that have traditionally been infrastructure engineers, storage engineers, and that are putting the cap on for Kubernetes these days. And I think a lot of that is just a general trend that what's been built around Kubernetes now allows you to focus more on the software instead of actually the management or provisioning of just the infrastructure, right? So it is that more application-centric model. But I mean, from that perspective, from an application-centric view on Kubernetes, where is Kubernetes in regard to that? Where are we today, and what sort of things do you see or expect to see in future with regards to that?
Right. So I expect to see a lot of change and a lot going on in this space in the future. So I think that, look, 2020 was a tough year for obvious reasons, okay? But interestingly, in the Kubernetes space, for the Kubernetes project, a lot of important things matured rapidly in 2020. Again, plumbing layer stuff. I won't go too much into the buzzwords, but things like the container storage interface, the CSI, I think it was early in 2020 that it went stable or generally available. And things like that and those low-level pieces are that solid foundation that we can now take those next steps and start deploying proper enterprise and business applications on. However, right, look, as simple as it is to maybe consumer-hosted Kubernetes, and as solid as that sort of low-level plumbing is, I still feel like deploying applications on Kubernetes is too hard. So yes, getting Kubernetes is easier and the plumbing is there now. But when we say that leaves you or users or businesses or charities or whatever it is that's deploying to Kubernetes, leaving them to focus on their apps, yes, it's good, but that part of the experience is still a bit not so good, if you know what I mean. It's still too much hard work. I feel like we need to get, and especially if Kubernetes wants to make it in the enterprise, okay, I feel like we need to get to the point where you can pick applications from a shelf, from a UI or something that's Kubernetes native, so it understands Kubernetes underneath, but it doesn't require you to be a Kubernetes infrastructure expert. And in a lot of ways, from a day-to-day perspective, right, it doesn't require you to be an application expert either. So I want, and I expect that we will get there, I hope at least, where I can say, I've got a bunch of my enterprise applications on the shelf here. When I say on the shelf, I'm talking about, I can click an icon in a Kubernetes UI, something that sits above Kubernetes, yeah, and say, right, deploy this application for me, but make it really easy so I can say, right, I want replicated data here, and I maybe want to choose where I want that replication to be. So maybe within availability zones in one data center or across data center, so like data center aware replication. I want to be able to set a snapshot schedule. I want to be able to enable migrations and things like that, all through a few clicks. And then Kubernetes and the application intelligence that's built in and wrapped around it goes and deploys that application for us. And I think that might not be exactly where we're headed, but I feel like that's where the industry wants to go, vendors, cloud providers. And I think that's because users and enterprises almost need that. Now, because, like I said before, the plumbing and stuff is done, it's kind of opened the fence so that we can start doing that. But the thing is, right, it really needs the ecosystem and all of the data management vendors and people out there. Now it's their turn to step up to the plate and absolutely bring their A game, not just make a half-hearted effort at it, because Kubernetes is amazing. And, as an infrastructure, it's great. For cloud native, it's great. But it's not the role or the job of the Kubernetes project or platform to do all of this replication and snaps and migration and stuff. It's more the job of your trusted enterprise partners to do that. They already do it, right? Bring it to the Kubernetes party and make it easily consumable. That's where I feel like we're heading.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, right? So like you say, a lot of these things aren't actually net new things, right? So the ability to protect data, to make it mobile, to replicate it, to give it DR, to give you that observability into how's it performing, how's it growing, what is the behavior like, and things are all things we solved in technologies far beyond 2014 and the emergence of Kubernetes. So being able to bring those insights into this new architecture, it is a new way of doing things. It is a new skill set that you're going to have to skill up in. It sounds surprising to me that really it's we've got this far, and these questions are only really coming to the surface now, right? So how is it that it's been around since 2014 and these questions are only really starting to be answered this far into the project? What are your sort of thoughts on that?
Right. So I think probably two things, right? I don't want to upset or disrespect anybody when I say this, right? But persisting data and storage in general is hard. Okay. I think it's fair to say if we look at even projects and technologies like VMware, and these are not that they pick the low-hanging fruit first, like that stateless compute, and then they bring a bit of networking, and finally they bring storage. And there are reasons for that. No disrespect to a network engineer out there or anything like that, but if the network goes down, I mean, people are going to throw me pelters here, right? But if the network goes down, generally speaking, okay, when it comes back, everything finds itself and we're back in business. But if storage goes down or if you lose data, then look, as an individual, I mean, heaven forbid, you might lose your job. As an organization, you can lose customers and you can even lose the entire business if it's a big enough data loss. So we rightly treat data with respect. Just thought about this, right? And reverence. No, I'm just kidding, right? But we have to be very careful about data. So that's one of the reasons it always comes late to the party. So we've waited until Kubernetes has matured for a good 5, 6, potentially 7 years before we're realistically looking at deploying important applications that host and manage and create business critical data. So storage is hard and data is vital. So it comes late in the game, right? But I think the other reason is that Kubernetes as a project, even though it's 7 years old, I hinted at this before, right? But it's not the mandate of Kubernetes, and it wouldn't even be the right thing for Kubernetes to go and reinvent the wheel again. And if you were an enterprise, you wouldn't even want that. So if you're looking to deploy Kubernetes and you're a large, I don't know, financial or I don't know, whatever pharmaceutical organization, and you go to management and say, And we're bringing Kubernetes in. It's great and all of that jazz, right? And it's got all this momentum. And we're going to put some business critical apps on it. And it's got this funky new storage layer. It would be like, there's the door over there. No chance, mate. So the fact that it will, or the fact that we're taking the model where we take, I'm going to throw some buzzwords here, right? Enterprise grade, battle hardened storage and data management systems from all of the trusted vendors out there that have been doing it for years and know how to do it and respect and reverence that data. Bringing that into Kubernetes has been the right way to do it. And we've really just had to wait for Kubernetes to mature and for the ecosystem and all those data management companies out there to feel the pressure from their customers to be saying, look, we're wanting to start using Kubernetes now because it brings great stuff. We need you to bring the platforms that we already trust into Kubernetes so that we can sleep at night when we deploy our applications to it. That's what I think, at least.
Again, I think that's a fantastic view into it. So, bring in those things where I think any engineer, and having been one myself, where you are on call, it can affect your nights and everything. Absolutely, it is something that you look at, and seeing it from the other side of the fence as well. Obviously, working for NetApp, for me, knowing how hard it is, not just to position a new technology, but even if you're just new to a new name to an organization, these things can take many months, if not years. Especially for certain sectors as well. So really take that on board. And as always, Nigel, really, great insights, great energy to share them with the group. And I hope all the delegates here enjoyed that as much as me. I always appreciate you sharing your experiences, sharing your insights as well. So thank you, Nigel.